These photos were never meant to be seen by the public. Some of them were hidden for over 80 years. These images were taken by men who believed they were on the right side of history. From the invasion of Poland to the fall of France and the battles in Norway, this is a rare look at the early triumphs of the Third Reich. In 1940, these men believed the war was already won. They were smiling, sightseeing, taking photos, with no idea what was waiting for them in the East. Look at their faces. Do they look like villains to you? This photo shows German military policemen in a Jewish ghetto in Poland in 1940. The military police was known as chained dogs because of the metal plates they wore around their necks. In the ghettos, they had total control over life and death, managing everything from daily movement to mass deportations. A close-up of the people inside the ghetto. Look at the man in the center. He is wearing a white armband, a forced mark of identity. In occupied Poland, wearing the Star of David armband was mandatory for all Jews over the age of 10. A market inside the ghetto. The German police look relaxed, even smiling, while the people behind them are desperate. When you see the German police smiling in these photos, what do you think they are feeling? Confidence, indifference, or something worse? Markets in the ghettos were basically the only way to survive, but the prices were insane, sometimes 10 times higher than they were outside the walls. People had to trade their jewelry, clothes, or even furniture just to get a single loaf of bread. This shot shows a girl standing by a tiny table on a sidewalk in the ghetto. The Nazis actually forced the Jewish communities to pay for and manufacture the armbands themselves. It stripped away their dignity and forced them to fund their own oppression. This photo shows a group of kids hanging out on a cobblestone street in the ghetto. Some of them are barefoot. In many ghettos, schools were actually banned by the Nazis, but the teachers and kids didn't give up. They started underground schools in secret basements or cramped apartments. This photo shows a street blocked off by a rough wooden fence and tons of tangled barbed wire. It's the edge of the ghetto in Poland. The Nazis didn't just use wire. In bigger cities like Warsaw, they forced the Jewish people to build massive brick walls, over 10 feet high, to seal themselves in. They even put broken glass on top of the walls so no one could climb over. This is a portrait of a first lieutenant in the German military police sitting in a fancy Mercedes convertible in Poland around 1940 or 1941. These high-ranking officers often used expensive cars like this Mercedes to cruise through occupied cities as a way to show off their status and remind everyone who was in control. This photo shows a German military cemetery in occupied Poland sometime between 1940 and 1941. By this point in the war, the German military had started setting up these hero cemeteries all across occupied Europe. They were designed to look very orderly and uniform to project a sense of discipline and sacrifice. When the Red Army arrived, these neat rows were smashed into pieces and wiped off the map, leaving the soldiers to rot in unmarked dirt. This photo shows a massive Nazi parade happening in Krakow, Poland, on October 26, 1940. The Nazis actually renamed this famous spot Adolf Hitler Square to try to erase the city's Polish history. This photo shows German military police checking out some local villagers in rural Poland around 1940 or 1941. In rural areas, the order police was obsessed with food. They set up these checkpoints specifically to make sure farmers weren't hiding grain or meat to feed their own families or sell on the black market. This photo is pretty eerie. It shows a German military policeman literally following right behind a local person driving a horse-drawn wagon through a snowy field in Poland. The German order police was constantly on the move in rural areas because they were terrified of two things: the Polish resistance and people hiding food. They would follow farmers back to their barns to make sure they weren't secretly storing extra grain or meat. While the Nazis were busy locking down Poland and setting up ghettos, they were already looking at their next big move to the north. This photo shows a group of German soldiers crowded into a small rowboat in Kristiansand, Norway, back in 1940. The invasion of Norway was actually the first time in history that a country used paratroopers, soldiers jumping out of planes, on a massive scale. The Germans wanted Norway mainly for its coastline, so they could protect their iron ore shipments and have a base for their submarines to attack Allied ships. Even though Norway tried to stay neutral, they were dragged into the war because of their location. This photo shows a squad of German soldiers standing guard at the end of a bridge in Kristiansand, Norway in 1940. They're fully geared up with helmets and rifles, just watching the local Norwegians go about their day. This photo shows a local Norwegian man standing in front of a big military truck packed with German soldiers. A young Norwegian boy standing on a bridge between two German soldiers in 1940. The Nazis actually had a very specific and creepy plan for Norway. Because they thought Norwegians were pure Aryans, they didn't treat them as harshly as people in Poland at first. They actually tried to win the hearts and minds of the population, especially the kids. They wanted to convince them that Germany and Norway were brothers. In Norway, many photos show German soldiers relaxed and almost carefree, swimming, resting, even posing with flowers. These photos weren't spontaneous. The German army staged performances like this to show strength, discipline, and intimidate local population. A group of German soldiers in Kristiansand stands around a bonfire where they're burning Norwegian posters, newspapers, and books. As soon as they took over, the Nazis started burning any books or papers they didn't like to purify the culture. A German soldier is leaning over the railing of a ship, looking totally miserable while dealing with seasickness during a sea transport in 1940. Seasickness was actually a major problem for the Germans during the invasion of Norway, because many of their troops were mountain soldiers who were used to climbing peaks, not being tossed around on tiny destroyers in the rough North Sea. This invasion was the first time in history a country used planes, ships, and land troops all at once, but the Germans were so cold that they had to steal skis and warm clothes from local villagers to survive. A line of German Mercedes-Benz off-road cars stands in an open field during the invasion of France in 1940. Even though Germany had cool cars like these, most of their army actually used millions of horses to carry their food and supplies throughout the whole war. A German soldier stands by a riverbank with a fishing rod near a bridge in occupied France. The German invasion of France was so fast, taking only about 6 weeks, that many soldiers often had nothing to do but wait around, go fishing, or go sightseeing in Paris. Most people think the German army was all tanks and trucks, but they actually used over 2 million horses to move their gear. A German soldier sits on the grass and tries to pull a small splinter out of his foot. Most of a soldier's life wasn't fighting, it was dealing with small things like blisters, bugs, and splinters. French soldiers walk through a field with their hands up as they surrender to German troops. During the Battle of France, almost 2 million French soldiers were taken as prisoners in just a few weeks because the German blitzkrieg was so fast and confusing. A group of French prisoners of war walks through a forest under the watch of a German guard. There were so many French prisoners that the Germans didn't have enough buildings to hold them, so many soldiers had to live in open fields surrounded by barbed wire for weeks. A fallen black French soldier lies on a dirt road after a battle in 1940. France used many soldiers from its colonies in Africa to help fight. Sadly, these brave men often faced the toughest parts of the battle and were treated very harshly if they were captured. German soldiers rest in the shade of some trees next to a small anti-tank gun, the name of which you can see on the screen, was nicknamed the door knocker by German soldiers because its shells were too weak to punch through thick enemy tanks. They just knocked on the outside. Local girls hand out food to German soldiers looking out of train windows at a station in France. Because the German invasion happened so quickly, many French civilians were confused and initially welcomed the soldiers with food and drinks, before the harsh reality of the occupation set in. A simple wooden cross with a steel helmet on top marks the grave of a German soldier in a quiet garden in France. Soldiers were often buried right where they fell, in backyards, parks, or along roads, before big military cemeteries were ever built. German soldiers stand inside the famous Palace of Versailles and look at large historical paintings on the walls. While these soldiers were just looking at art, Nazi leaders were actually stealing it. They took about 20% of all the art in Europe, including over 600,000 famous paintings and statues. Some of them were even found in Hitler's bunker. German soldiers used a public urinal on a Paris street in 1940, surrounded by ads for beer, a popular French drink. Which photo from this video disturbed you the most, and why? If you haven't seen the first part, the link is on the screen. There I show rare photos taken by German soldiers on the Eastern Front, where their life had turned into hell. Subscribe if you want to see the side of history most people never do.